Broward Sheriff's Office is at the top of that list. And they are the only ones that have refused to accept any responsibility. Fighting with the families even up to this point. It's been 6 years. It's not right, and Sheriff Greg Toney should take care of this. It's not right. It's been 6 years. The Parkland murderer walked through that building, and they had a school resource deputy on that campus, and he waited outside. He never went in for 48 minutes. He could have saved lives. The Broward Sheriff's Office was at the murderer's house 43 times, and they didn't do anything. If he had been arrested, I think Alex and the 16 others would be here today.
Can you take us to the moment that you saw the body?
No, it's just horrible. It's just horrible. I remember I've been through that building over 10 times, and every time it's excruciatingly painful to see Alex's blood all over the chair, and to see how he died. Alex didn't have a chance. He was caught by surprise, and Alex and 16 others were murdered because people didn't take school safety seriously. But what also is upsetting is that I wasn't able to bring more people, more officials through that building. I brought almost 500 school and law enforcement and federal officials through that building. We did multiple congressional delegations. We brought the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, the Vice President of the United States, the Director of the FBI, so that they could bear witness to what happened. And even to this day, people come to me, officials, Max, is there any way that I can bring my team through that building? And the answer is no. We knew that the building was going to come down this summer. We should have gotten more people through that building because it'll never happen again.
Just to show them what happened now, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to understand the magnitude of the failures unless you're walking through that building. And this country is so reactive. We don't proactively do the things that we need to do.
I can't remember the exact date because it just came across like last week, but I know that opposing counsel absolutely wants to depose her and just see, how it goes, see how she stands up to examination, that good stuff, damages, stuff like that.
Because she's a relevant fact witness to the retaliation.
Oh, yeah, very important. Whether or not D.A. Willis is deposed, that just depends on the law. Georgia has that kind of apex doctrine, so before you can go after a government official such as Fani, you kind of have to show that you can't get it from somewhere else and all that kind of stuff. But so it's going to depend on who says, I don't know, I can't recall, or denies things prior to me going after a deposition with her.
Okay. All right. Anything further you want to add?
No.
Okay. Back to you then, Ms. Timpson. I'm going to try to wrap this up because I know folks getting restless wanting to get out of here. You have heard some of Ms. Willis's public comments about the controversy with her and Mr. Wade, right? You mentioned early in your testimony that he was present in your interview in the fall of 2020.
Correct.
Do you know what his role was?
He was a member of the integrity
transition integrity team. That's what she called it. She ran on this Integrity Matters platform, and so they had her transition team was called the Special Integrity Transition Team, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
And to your knowledge, was he present in all the interviews for the open positions that people had to reapply for?
He was in all the interviews of every single person that I've spoken to that I knew in the DA's office, yes.
Were you aware of any personal relationship between Mr. Wade and Miss Willis back at that time when everybody was interviewing in, sounds like, the fall of 2020?
No, I just knew he was somebody important because he was leading the interviews, but I didn't know any personal relationship or anything. I just knew he was clearly somebody that she knew and trusted.
And did you ever learn of any personal relationship?
I do believe at one point in 2021 there was just office talk of Miss Willis having a boyfriend on staff. I didn't know who it was at the time, but just office talk, but nothing that I saw with my own eyes or anything like that.
Do you know what the DA's office policy was about basically having relationship with co-employees or supervisors and their employees that had to report to them?
From under Mr. Howard, I was under the impression that there was like a non-fraternization policy, but that was nothing that I ever had to worry about. So,
okay. We had heard a little information in one of our earlier hearings about the use of these P cards. Are you familiar with those?
yes.
Explain to us what a P card is.
So I'm assuming they were speaking about the access cards. Is that what they're speaking about?
They were like a credit card. Mr. Pitts told us about that some employees had ability to pay for travel or meals or things. It's almost like a debit or a credit card, it sounded like.
Oh, then no. I thought you were talking about the access cards, but no, I wouldn't have known about that.
As I guess you were a program head.
Where we are in day 25 of the Commonwealth's case against defendant Karen Reed. Now, the latest that we're learning from there inside of the courtroom is that there was an issue with the camera shot and jurors coming into the courtroom and inadvertently one of those jurors, at least one, being filmed. So the judge, in response to that, has ordered that the cameras be shut down, but the media there is working to get an audio live stream, at least for the day, while they figure things out. The judge is also talking to some of these jurors at sidebar. So we'll continue to bring you those updates. We do have our Court TV team there inside of the courtroom, so they will be able to bring us those updates out of the courtroom as we get them. But while we wait for court to resume, we do want to look back at some of the key evidence in this case. The Commonwealth has been bringing their best evidence, but we anticipate some of the best will be here towards the end of the case. And we know that we haven't heard the voicemails of the defendant that she left for the victim in this case in the hours after he was in the snow dying. Now, we have this piece from Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson, who retraced the drive of Karen Reed to that house on Fairview.
The street over here. I'm with Austin Brady as we're making our way as part of this investigation. So this is Cedar Crest that we're looking in front of right now. I'm going to put my turn signal on and we're going to approach Fairview Road. Remember, this would have been completely pitch black. Snowstorm, and an epic one early in the hours that morning. And
slow down.
Windshield wipers would have been on. Okay.
Slow down.
Here's the intersection, Vinny.
This, Okay, here we go. Beautiful. So now, are you on Fairview yet?
So this is that intersection, and I know you've been here. So this is Cedar Crest, and then this is Fairview. So just about a couple yards away, that's 34 Fairview. Let's take you over there. So
Okay,
this is
make that
the route
turn.
that Karen Reed took. All right?
Make that turn. And again, it's light out, so it's nice we can see, but it's really about the field of vision as well as you're looking from the car. So what are you noticing as you're
Vinny,
approaching the house?
So we're approaching the house. It's at a grade of a curve. Here's 34 Fairview. I'm turned in front of the house right now, and this is actually in front of the mailbox. So this is the position of the house in front of the mailbox. You can see the two entry doors that are constantly being talked about by these witnesses on the stand. Down the road, it turns, so anyone that was approaching from that direction, they're not going to see the front yard that much. And remember, we just made that other turn. So this is in the center of two turns, and it goes up, down. It's about a hilly neighborhood. It is hilly. And so if you're driving through here in the dark and in the snow, you might not see much.
Let me do this. Stay where you are. Don't move. Have Austin show us the front again. I want the viewers to see out the front, the front windshield, not the side, but the front windshield where John O'Keefe's body would have been. So if someone is getting into a car or leaving, that looks pretty close to me. Yeah. How does it look to you? Like when you look straight ahead, how close does it look?
Yeah, these are huge houses as they appear on TV, but the yards are very small, and it's a very dense neighborhood. You can see the flagpole is only about 7-8 feet away from where the street starts. There is no sidewalk. And you can see that from any direction that you're at in front of this house. I'm going to back up. There's no one behind me. I'm backing up to the neighbor's home. So if someone was approaching this house to pick somebody up, this is what they would be seeing as they're approaching the mailbox that we've heard about and the driveway where a lot of these witnesses were also parked. And still, you can see where John O'Keefe's body was in front of that flagpole from any direction over here.
Absolutely. Like, as you get up to that mailbox and pull up, it just seems there's not even much of a grade, is there? There's a slight going down grade on the side where his body was found, but my goodness, like I see the flagpole's very clear, the fire hydrant and the white, is that the box that they're talking about, that white thing sticking up in the middle there?
Exactly. That's the box that a lot of witnesses have described as something being weird, metal sticking out of the ground, because remember, this was all covered in thick snow. But from this vantage point, I mean, you can see neighbors' windows from over here. That's very interesting. There is a lot of people's homes across the street. It's a very dense neighborhood, but from this flagpole and where John O'Keefe's body was, I mean, look at how close it is to this yard. And also, that is the gate where the defense showed a video from the basement doors. They lift up. They're on the side of the house. You can walk through that gate and walk right over here to the flagpole.
Yeah. As I'm looking at this from the car, and I was there as well, but now after listening to all the testimony and all the people that didn't see anything, to me, I'm surprised. Like, obviously it's possible, but I'm just surprised because you would have a slight contrast if you had a dusting of snow and you had someone dressed in clothes. So can you do this now? Can you pull away slowly and see how quickly that disappears? Go down the road just a little bit, and then I want you to make a turn when you can safely so we can sort of retrace Karen Reed's trip that morning with Jennifer McCabe and Kerry Robertson. So why don't we pull away slowly and tell me what you're seeing. We got to put those letters down, though. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm waiting for a car to pass. And then now we can go. So now we're approaching where you hear a lot of witnesses talking about the fire hydrant. So this is the property line. And Austin's going to show you from this direction the house, which is to his back. See, you can see a little bit of perspective right there. So now I'm going to continue to pull away. And now the road starts sloping. So the house was pretty much even grade. But now the road starts sloping. There's a dead-end street over here to my left. That's where we're going to turn around. And you can see that it's a windy neighborhood. So that could be an issue when we hear about the plow driver's testimony.
Exactly.
Which we're waiting to hear.
So now this is the approach the morning that the three women, including Karen Reed, who was in the back middle seat, make that approach. And here we are already. So the question is, what are you going to see as you approach the house and the flagpole and everything else that'll be coming up on the left-hand side? What are your thoughts about what you're seeing as you're driving?
So I'm noticing that it was a grade up. And I'm also noticing that you can't really see the house if those trees are right there. But again, it would have been in the winter time.
How about where John O'Keefe's body was? How about where his body was? Is that more difficult because of the curve, or is it easier?
You can see the flagpole as soon as you pass the curve on the street and you're approaching in this direction towards Cedar Crest. Clear as day, you can see it. But again, if the plow had been here before Karen Reed, Carrie Roberts, and Jen McCabe would have approached the house, maybe they couldn't see past the snow. The two women that were in the front seat, and Karen Reed, you know, she starts, according to them in their testimony, she starts screaming and kicking in the back seat, saying, let me out, he's over here. And then she just runs over here and rips up his shirt, takes up her shirt, and lays on top of him. And then Carrie Roberts, you know, her testimony, she wipes away the snow from his face, and then she says that it was grass underneath him.
So when they're there the next day, obviously much more snow. There'll be much more snow that following morning as they approach this area. But coming around that curve, to me, it's not quite as open and obvious as coming from the other direction.
Yes, because the other direction, you're coming from an uphill, slightly down, and it's more level and home. And then the rest of the neighborhood goes downhill, and there are curves downhill. So there's twists and turns on both sides of where this home is located, the former Albert home, for many generations, we might add. But yeah, this is where we are.
This is fascinating. Now, there are no street lights anywhere, right? That you've seen?
I'm noticing there is a street light, yes. So there is a street light directly in front of 34 Fairview that Austin is showing you right there. But I'm not sure how much light it gives and if it was on that night. I mean, this was during a blizzard. There was a lot going on. But there is a light right in front of this house. And there's also a lot of lights at the home on their porch. They have porch lights. But again, I don't know if they would have been on that night.
They didn't come on till, well, we don't know if they were on that night, right? But the following morning, it took a while for them to come on. But I don't think they're going to illuminate that part at all, because you're not in front of the house. You're sort of to the side. So, Matt, what's your final analysis taking this drive? And obviously, it's not dark. It's not snowing, which makes it, I guess, very different to a certain extent. But the road is the road. As you're driving, do you see that area as you drive, or if you're driving and you're looking, are you more focused on the road as you just did this drive?
I think that you would be more focused on the road if it was snowing, because there are turns, and a lot of these people didn't know exactly where this house was. There's that part of it. But I can't get past the fact that where John O'Keefe lay dying on the front of the yard here, you can see it from every direction as you approach this house. You can definitely see it. And I mean, that's burned in my mind at this point.
Matt Johnson returning to the scene tonight. Thank you so much. Drive safely.
Thanks, Vinny.
fascinating look at the scene from our crime and justice correspondent, Matt Johnson. Matt is inside of that courtroom there in Dedham, Massachusetts, where, as we reported earlier, the judges ordered that the cameras be turned off for the rest of the day, and they are working on an audio feed. But here are the updates that we are getting on this situation and how it unfolded. Apparently, there was a juror that was brought to a sidebar to discuss something with the judge. We don't know what the details of that discussion was. We know that the photographer who's there inside of the courtroom had a wide shot, didn't know that the juror was going to be coming up to the bench. That is something rare inside of the courtroom, for the juror to come up and speak with the parties and the judge. But because that juror was caught on camera, did not air here on Court TV, but because of that, the judge has ordered those cameras to be off, the one camera that's inside of the courtroom. And now we understand that the judge is calling in the jurors one by one for more questioning. So they've gotten through about 4 of the female jurors that have been called to the bench to speak with the judge and the attorneys, but we're not getting any guidance on whether they're being asked about that inadvertent shot of the first juror. Probably not, because they would not have learned about it if they're not watching anything about this case. But there may be something else going on that these jurors are all needing to be voir dire or questioned in front of the judge and the parties. Let's bring in our guests who are standing by to weigh in on this. Criminal defense attorneys and former prosecutors. Joe Tamburino is still with us, and Franz Borghardt is joining us. Franz, let me start with you. This is the development inside of the courtroom. These are our notes from Matt Johnson. He'll continue to update us. But what are your thoughts on how this is being handled and what may be happening with these jurors?
So true crime fans everywhere are clutching their pearls because they may not be able to watch the Karen Reed trial today, but they may be able to listen to it. Look, this is the trade-off, right? If you want cameras in your courtroom, if you want video in your courtrooms for transparency, you've got to do things to protect jurors. And if that is compromised, the judge has to step in, especially in this case, has to step in to make sure that the jurors' safety and the process is secure. So I would not be surprised if they're asking questions about those things and about, what was seen, what was not seen. Is it going to affect your ability to be fair and impartial, the fact that you may have been on video? These are the kind of things that I think the judge may be addressing. The ship is going to go forward, to be sure, but this is the trade-off of the world we live in, is that sometimes things like this happen and, we pivot and adjust, and judge has to do stuff.
Certainly a juror's privacy is of utmost importance there inside of the courtroom. There must be some other issue, though, that the judge was wanting this juror to come to the bench for initially. Now, oftentimes we hear the judge go on the record with the parties to say, I received maybe this note, or there's been this concern about the juror, and we're going to bring them in. And Joe, sometimes I see it where the judge puts the juror in the jury box, and so that usually keeps them out of the way. But it seemed the judge wanted to immediately bring this juror up to the bench. But is that typically how it is handled, in terms of if there is an issue, the judge wants to speak to both the jury and or the juror by themselves, and then both of the parties at the same time, so that everyone knows what's going on?
Well, I mean, you raise a number of things, Julia. I'm a little perplexed as to why the judge is doing it this way, just because for maybe a split minute or a second that a juror was on the video or the juror was being filmed for a moment. And here's why. I mean, mistakes happen. Sometimes you walk in front of a camera as a juror and you say, oops, I didn't mean to do that, but obviously you've been recorded. I think something else is happening, because this judge is asking the jurors questions. So could there have been some communication with the person who's doing the videoing? Could there have been a video that captures what a juror was saying to somebody else? I just think it's more than simply for a brief period of time a juror was recorded. Something else is going on.
I would agree with you, and we understand, Joe, that the first juror who really precipitated all of this by going up to that sidebar initially is back at the bench. So the judge has gone through multiple jurors, spoken with them. They are still in that sidebar. David Yannetti, Alan Jackson, prosecution, all up at the bench listening. And I want to point out something that I remember from those moments. We were watching the feed. We saw Karen Reed in the shot of the camera. And there was one point during this long sidebar in the morning, she was shaking her head vigorously. And it was unclear what she was reacting to, but it was in a way that was uncommon for how we typically see her at the defense table. So I don't know if there is some other issue going on, like you mentioned. This is all we know right now, is that we have a lot of people inside of the courtroom. They're in the gallery trying to read lips and trying to listen in, just as far as what Matt is saying he's perceiving there in the gallery, because you have family who's wondering what is going on, but they don't have any more information on the record. Franz, I want to bring up something that you mentioned about transparency in this case, because if there was ever one where you don't want the public to feel that there is something being kept from them, this is one of those cases. It's even more unique than others. Would you agree?
So I think this is one of the most unique unicorn case where the most bizarre stuff has happened, right? And yes, I 100% agree. This is the case where you want to make sure you get it right in the courtroom with these jurors. And I think a reminder is worth mentioning. This is an extremely small courtroom, right? So part of the issue also is this is a courtroom that is really tiny. There's not a lot of breathing room. If you're looking around during the actual trial, everybody's kind of sandwiched next to each other. So I don't know what happened, but I'm excited to find out, because I mean, the fact that Karen Reed, was obviously animated, shaking her head, means that something of relevance did happen. And look, we're going to find out very soon.
We will learn that from Matt Johnson there inside of the courtroom. We do have to get to a break, so we are going to keep monitoring what's happening. Matt Johnson, again, is there in the courtroom. He's giving us the updates of what's coming up and if they're going to move into testimony in this case. But after we get back from this break, we are going to shift gears for now and talk about the new details that were revealed by a recent document dump in the case of the murder of Madeline Soto. Plus.
211, I need a car to go help the kid. He's in the first couple aisles.
Where's your cuffs? Get cuffs? Who's got cuffs?
Slow down. Hold on. We're good. All right. Yep. Okay. Yeah, you want me to go to the female or triangle? Go to the female.
That's the video of the arrest for this woman. She's been accused of fatally stabbing a 3-year-old boy outside an Ohio grocery store. Coming up, we have the surveillance video that led up to this random attack.
Tonight on Court TV.
These are the big cases that everyone is talking about.
A lot of new developments taking place.
Shocking,
I know who killed John Bonet.
to say the least.
You cannot make this stuff up.
It's unreal.
The scene of the double murders is behind us right here.
Things are happening. The investigation is continuing.
Closing arguments with Vinny Politan. Tonight at 8/7 Central. Only on Court TV. 6.
Well, welcome back to Court TV Live. While we wait to catch you up on what's happening inside of that courtroom in the killer cover-up murder trial involving Karen Reed, we're turning our attention to another case where we want to share some disturbing new revelations in the case of 13-year-old Madeline Soto. Now, Court TV received nearly 1,000 pages of documents from the Osceola and Orange County Sheriff's offices. The documents outline a mountain of evidence that they've gathered against Madeline's accused killer, Stephen Stearns. Stearns was the boyfriend of Madeline's mother. In the documents, investigators detail video evidence they say proves Stearns was lying about his timeline the day that Madeline was seen alive. Now, according to the reports, he told police that he dropped Madeline off near her school at 8:30 a.m. on February 26th. But officials say that surveillance video showed him driving with Madeline's limp body in the car for nearly an hour before, and they believe she was deceased at that time. Stearns and Soto explained to sheriff deputies what happened during the morning Madeline went missing. This is body cam video from the time that deputies first arrived. They spoke with Stephen Stearns, they spoke with her mother, Jen Soto, and this was after 911 calls were made to report the 13-year-old missing.
My daughter was dropped off close to school this morning, but never made it. I went to drop her to school.
I'm sorry, one second.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Are we looking for another kid, or we have a kid?
Looking for another one.
Alright, so people are still on the scene. Let's put that out in the hospital location. How long?
13.
I'm trying to get there right now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Alright.
So she was supposed to be dropped off at school, didn't make it to school.
Didn't make it to school. I went to pick her up from school today, and she never came out. They announced it over the speaker, and I'm just like, maybe she walked here, because sometimes she'll walk here to this office. I came here, nothing. I went back to the school, they were closed. I got a notice, an email from the school saying she was absent, but I also messaged her teacher, and he looked at her entire attendance today and saw that she was completely not at school today either.
Okay.
So she never made it.
What was she last seen wearing?
26 County, Kelly 45. People hit my call, 931, the same call.
Green hoodie,
Green hoodie.
Crocs,
White Crocs.
either blue or black pants.
I think black shorts.
Black shorts?
Yeah.
Black shorts? Okay. Did she, like, have any places that you guys know that she would usually be at? Any friend's house? Any places that, like, she likes to hang out?
Typically, no.
Did she have, like, Apple Watch?
She's got a device. The only device she's got on her right now is her school laptop.
Her school laptop? Is that trackable?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
It should be. It should be.
If the Wi-Fi is turned on, it'll try to connect to any Wi-Fi.
So if I like circle here.
It connects to any USB station.
Well, does she not have a history of running away or anything? She's hanging out last time, kind of?
Possibly, I don't know. She got dropped off. She was like, so she's in Beverly Spine's car. So she didn't want to be dropped off at school. She wanted to be dropped off like half a block away so she can walk.
It's an image thing, she's in the face.
But he dropped her off half a block away and drove away.
Okay. Did she ever go to school though?
No, we called school.
She was walking in that direction, she was rifling through her backpack, just looking for something. I thought maybe she was just looking for headphones before she got her walking on.
Yeah.
But she was just kind of, shambling over in that direction. It looked the same as any other morning.
Okay.
What was the last thing you asked?
If she went to school, I guess it was
So I got confirmation from the school that she never made it. They sent me an email saying she didn't make it. But I also spoke to her or emailed one of her teachers directly, and he looked at all her attendance for all her periods and told me she didn't make it at all today.
As the investigation continued, video was obtained from other traffic cameras allegedly showing Stearns taking a different route than what he told officials. And at one point, his car was seen pulling into a parking garage at a Holiday Inn Club Vacations, getting out and carrying what appeared to be the limp body of Madeline Soto to the trunk of his vehicle. Investigators also revealed that Madeline's mom, Jennifer Soto, who you saw there in the video, she told officers that she allowed her daughter to share a bed with Stearns, and that on the night before she disappeared, that she sent her daughter and Stearns to sleep together so she could sleep alone and get more rest. Stephen Stearns has been charged with Madeline's murder as well as dozens of sex crime offenses. And so far, nothing has been filed against the mother of Madeline, Jen Soto. Let's bring in our guests to discuss this hour. Criminal defense attorneys and former prosecutors Joe Tamburino and Franz Borghardt is with us. Franz, let me start with you on this case, get your insight. Jen Soto there in that video, she was very detailed with officers, seemed forthcoming about the information that she was providing. Your thoughts on what her knowledge may have been in that moment about whether her daughter was actually missing, a runaway, or had been killed?
So I think her issue is going to be, I don't know that she knew anything during the body camera footage. She seems credible. She seems like she's not being evasive. I don't know that they have any proof that she's lying. Her problem is going to be more the negligence of allowing her daughter around this guy, to sleep in a bed with this guy, which may be a lower crime, but is probably a crime nonetheless. So I think her criminal justice culpability is going to be lower, but I don't know that she's going to escape unscathed.
Joe, looking at Stephen Stearns there, I mean, he seems like a very involved parent. He's answering some of the questions before the mother is able to about this little girl. And so, you know, he wasn't arrested on the spot at all. It took time before officers were able to poke holes in what his story was. But your thoughts on this dynamic that you're seeing between these two people as police are looking for their missing, not their child together. He's this on-again, off-again boyfriend who had moved out of the apartment, but this little girl who's in their lives.
A few things. First, I can't believe it took so long to actually charge Mr. Stearns. Second, the evidence against Mr. Stearns seems very powerful. I don't see this case going anywhere. But lastly, yes, Jen Soto is going to have some explaining to do, as well as she faces criminal liability. You know, we discussed this before about culpable negligence. If you place a child or any person in a situation that where you are placing them in a dangerous situation and you should have known better. It's almost like driving drunk and killing someone. So it's going to be a lot of what did Jen know about Stearns, and she's placing her daughter in that situation where harm could come to her. You know, culpable negligence in Florida, if it's just a bodily harm thing, could be as low as a misdemeanor. However, if it results in death or great bodily harm, it's a felony.
Thank you for breaking that down for us. We are going to squeeze in a break because we are getting word that we do have video coverage, a video feed from the courtroom. The judge has decided to move it to a Zoom link, so it may look a little different, but we will be able to show that coverage of the testimony inside the courtroom. And will we understand why all of these jurors, one by one, were questioned by the judge at the bench? We will see. We'll get that break and get you back into that courtroom after this.
I'm Matt Johnson in Dedham, Massachusetts for the killer or cover-up murder trial. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Turn yourselves within an inch. Okay, and we will move on. All right, your first witness, please, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth will call Ms. Jessica Hyde to the stand.
Right this way. Watch your step, please. You solemnly swear the evidence before the court and jury in the case now and hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I swear.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Ma'am, if you want that microphone is adjustable, you can put it pretty much anywhere you're comfortable with, okay?
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Jessica Hyde, Hyde.
And what do you do for work, ma'am?
I'm a digital forensics examiner. I own a digital forensics firm that does training, services, and research.
And the digital forensics firm that you own, what's it called?
Hexordia, Hexordia.
And how long have you had your own firm?
3 years.
Now, Ms. Hyde, if I could ask you to talk a little bit about your educational background and your work history. Starting with undergraduate, where did you go and what, if any, degrees did you receive?
My undergraduate degree is a Bachelor of Science in Electronics Engineering Technologies. I was on active duty in the Marine Corps at the time, so I went to several schools. My final graduation was from ECPI.
I'm going to ask you to slow down your speech a little bit, if you can.
Absolutely. So my final graduation was from ECPI, College of Technology. However, I attended several universities because I was on active duty at the time.
And following your undergraduate, where did you go from there?
From there, I went and completed my tour on active duty. I went into work in the field and eventually then did my master's in computer forensics from George Mason University.
And when about was it that you received your master's in computer forensics from George Mason?
I received my master's, I believe, 2014.
And as far as, you mentioned that you had started working a little bit post-military, but before going to grad school, is that right?
Correct. I started working in digital forensics in 2010.
And where did you begin when you started working in 2010?
I was a contractor for a company called American Systems, working at the Terrorist Explosive Device Analytical Center, called TDAC.
And following sort of going forward to when you received your graduate degree, if you could speak a little bit about your work history since then.
Sure. So I continued to work at TDAC while I had completed my degree. That was doing digital forensic analysis on phones that were connected to improvised explosive devices. So most of the phones I received was post-blast, and I would recover data from that and analyze that. From there, once I had completed my degree, I went and worked in the regular private sector. I worked for Ernst & Young, now called EY. There I was one of their mobile forensics experts working a variety of cases, everything from insider threat and insider trading. Then I really missed doing more public service work, so I left to go to the National Media Exploitation Center, which is I worked there as a contractor under a company called Basis Technology. That organization supports 22 government agencies in the intelligence community, supporting the things that are either the highest priority or the things that other organizations can't support. So we were the center of excellence for the U.S. government in mobile exploitation, and I ran that team there.
Now, And then
from there, I can go from there. From there, I went and became the director of forensics for Magnet Forensics, which is a company that develops tools for digital forensics. So there I was in a position where I did a large amount of research into new artifacts, unsupported access to devices, et cetera. I was there for 5 years before starting my own firm.
And then what did you, no, I'm sorry, let me start again. As far as what, if any, teaching experience do you have in relation to the field?
That is an excellent question. I've actually been an adjunct professor at George Mason University since 2016. I've taught 20 terms. In their graduate program, I teach the Mobile Forensic Analysis course in their Digital Forensics Master's program.
In addition to your work and your teaching and all your training, are there any professional organizations related to your field that you're a member of?
Actually, several. I am a member of the Organizational Scientific Area Committee on Digital Evidence, which is a part of NIST, the National Institute of Science Technology. I am a member of the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence, also called SWIG-DE. I am the chair of a project called DFIR Review that does peer review of academic work that's done by practitioners in the form of blogs. I've been chairing that project since 2018, or when it started, with our first publications in 2019. I am the first VP at the International Executive Committee level of the High Tech Crime Investigation Association, also called HTCIA, which I've been a member of since 2012, and I've been elected, I'll ascend to president next September. I am also, I do a lot of volunteer work. I also am an associate member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, AAFS, and I just recently finished my term as an associate editor for Forensic Science International Digital Investigations, which is a peer-reviewed journal in the academic space of digital forensics, and I'm still a reviewer, but I stepped down from my duties as an associate editor.
Bringing me to my next question, what, if any, sort of articles or publications have you published in relation to this?
Great question. I've published a paper on the standardization of data recovery. I worked on that with Dr. Owen Casey and Dr. Nelson. That was published in Forensic Science International Digital Investigations Journal. I also was the second author on a paper related to the use of AI in digital forensics, artificial intelligence, and I've published numerous articles, blogs, white papers. I probably have published about 20 of those, but just speaking to the peer review work, there's 2.
When you say peer review, can you explain to the jury a little bit about what that means or what that process entails?
Absolutely. So a peer-reviewed work is when you have a novel piece of research that you then submit that novel, never been presented work to a journal. It then gets reviewed by numerous academic peers. It goes through cycles of revision where they ask more questions. On the standardization of file recovery paper, that process took about 14 months for it to be peer-reviewed by experts in the field, and then it is published in a journal.
And so you've had both articles that you've authored that have been peer-reviewed and published, as well as you've performed the role of reviewer of other people's work?
Correct. I've performed in addition to the publications I've done, I reviewed at least 20 to 30 articles, both in a combination of support for Forensic Science International Digital Investigations Journal and DFIR Review.
Now, Ms. Hyde, if you could explain to the jury, when you say the term as far as digital forensics, what do you understand that term to mean with relation to what you do?
I would describe digital forensics as the analysis of data from any storage medium that can control data, be that a mobile phone, computer, or cloud, for the intention of that data intentionally being used for court.
And with reference to your firm, Hicks Audio, where is that located? What state?
We are headquartered in New York State, in Bridgeport, New York, which is outside of Syracuse. We also have an office location in the DC metro area in Tyson's Corner, but we have employees in 6 states.
And with respect to your duties and responsibilities in regard to your firm, what is it that you do?
Great question. So I do perform digital forensic analysis on cases. I currently work on 2 U.S. government contracts supporting 1 digital forensic analysis and 2 novel research and exploitation of mobile devices. So I'm named personnel on 2 contracts, and then I manage another 3. I also develop training for mobile forensics. My courses have been taken by people all over the country, and Hexordia also delivers that training. I also do research and presentations for journals, conferences, et cetera. So a combination of casework, education, and research.
Now, Ms. Hyde, if I could turn your attention to May of 2023. At some point during that month, were you contacted by the Norfolk District Attorney's Office in relation to this case?
Yes, on May 4th, I was contacted by Detective Tully via our website about this case.
And eventually, was there a contract that was executed and you agreed to do some work in relation to one specific area of this case?
Yes, contract was executed on May 9th and work began on May 10th of 2023.
And as far as the specific information in relation to this case, what was it that you looked at? I'm sorry. Let me start by saying, what was it that you were asked to look at?
I was asked to look at 2 specific Google search terms that took place on January 29th.
And with regard to the information that was provided, and we'll get to that in a moment, but with respect to the question that was asked, was it a question that was posed, or were you asked to find some sort of specific response?
I was asked to look at the timelines and timestamps related to those Google searches.
Now, with regard to what, if anything, was then provided to you, or what, if anything, did you review in the course of your analysis?
I received 2 reports. I received the affidavit from Richard Green, and I received the report from Trooper, I don't want to butcher his name, but something along the lines of Nicholas Garino.
Perfect.
Oh, good.
And is it your understanding that Mr. Green was a person that was retained by the defense in this case?
Yes, I was aware of that.
So you essentially received reports from the state police and a witness for the defense, correct?
That is correct.
In addition to those 2 reports, what, if anything else, did you receive in relation to your analysis here?
On May 10th, I received via U.S. Postal Mail a copy of the drive with data from a phone that was identified to me as belonging to Jennifer McCabe. It was a full file system extraction from a gray key.
And so when you received that information, what, if anything, did you do with it?
The first thing I did with that data set after having been retained was I made a forensic copy. I used an ArcPoint Atrio to copy the data from that original disk, which was then placed in our safe, to our working copy drive.
And that ArcPoint Atrio, what is that?
It's a forensics tool that does extraction and duplication.
And then once that process was completed, what did you do from there?
I immediately verified the hash values of my new image to make sure that it matched the hash value of the original image.
And what is the hash value?
A hash value is an algorithmic numerical representation of the data. So when you have a hash value, that value is unique to a certain set of data. So when you have that same hash value matching, you're ensuring that your copy that you made was correct and not in any way damaged or corrupt.
And as far as matching those hash values, were you able to do so?
Yes, the hash values of both the copy I made to work from and the original matched. They also matched the document that came along with the drive stating the original hash value.
And then what did you do from there?
From there, I processed the image in several forensics tools. I used Celebrite Physical Analyzer. I used Magnet Axiom. I used a tool called ARTX, A-R-T-E-X. I utilized a tool called iLeap, and I later used a tool called Sanderson Forensics SQLite, but I did not use that tool at this point.
Now, with reference to the tools that you used, that you just went through, are Are those fairly common tools, or are those tools that are commonly used within your industry?
Yes, they are commonly used digital forensics tools that are very standard for other forensics examiners to use on mobile exploitation.
And as far as those different types of tools, so I guess my question is, there were a variety of different tools that you use.
Correct.
And why were you using the different tools?
So different forensics tools have different capabilities and look at data a little bit differently. Phones have thousands of applications. If you look at the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, you can download a total of 6 million apps between the two. Commercial forensics tools, they can only support so many applications, so they each work and support different bits of data, so it's important to use multiple tools so you can see the results from different data sets and be able to compare those results and enhance those with manual analysis.
And with respect to using those sort of different variety of tools from Cellebrite to Axiom to Ardex, et cetera, is that something that you typically do as far as your normal process of conducting a forensic analysis?
Yeah, that's very, very typical for me to process with multiple tools to ensure that I'm getting the most complete interpretations from forensics tools. Of course, you go beyond that with your analysis, but it's absolutely pertinent to do that. I would run some of those tools before others because of speed, and so I can begin analysis while other tools are running.
If I could ask you just about the last one that you mentioned, just briefly, as far as the Sanderson tool.
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury sort of what that is and how that interplays with the other tools and analysis?
The Sanderson tool is meant to look at a specific type of data structure called a SQLite database. SQLite databases are very nuanced, and this particular tool allows you to take that database and explore it at a deeper level than the other forensics tools allow.
And just for the record, when you use that term as far as a SQLite database, how is that spelled?
It is capital SQL, lowercase ITE, and SQLite is also commonly pronounced as SQLite, so both pronunciations are acceptable.
Now, once you received the extraction, made the copy, and then ran it through of those variety of tools, what is it that you specifically were looking at, and what is it that you were trying to ascertain, or the question that you were trying to answer?
So in looking at that analysis, I was focused specifically on the data that took place on January 29th. So the first thing I did was I limited my search within those tools to that period, and I looked at the artifacts that they were parsing pertaining to Safari history, as Safari was the browser that had been in use at that time.
Now, in addition to looking at those search, what, if any, information were you looking at in relation to deletion?
I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
In addition to looking at those materials as far as those searches were concerned, what, if anything else, were you looking at regarding that data with respect to deletion?
I didn't hear the last word. With respect to?
Deletion.
Deletion. I apologize. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the things that was asked, one of the things that was actually in the affidavit from Richard Green was that it was stated that there was belief that one of the search terms had been deleted. So I was specifically looking at that search term to see if what the reason was for the suspicion of deletion. There is... The tools denote things based on how they are running as an automatic process. The tools are designed to parse through large amounts of data to make it easier. So the tools will often flag certain data as recovered, and sometimes there is confusion between what recovery and deletion means. That actually was the subject of the paper I referenced earlier that I co-authored. And the tools are sometimes misinterpreted that that statement of recovery means deletion. So I was exploring that.
Now, you mentioned specifically there were 2 searches of interest that you were exploring. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what were those 2 searches, and what, if any, information did you have in relation to those?
I had the information from the 2 reports that had been written in terms of what they found. And the 2 search terms, one was HOS, H-O-S, long to die and cold, and the other one was how long TI die in CLKD.
And what, if any, information from your, starting, if you could, sort of walk the jury through as far as your analysis, what you first observed, and what your analysis consisted of as it evolved?
Absolutely. So when I first looked at it, some of the tools surfaced the data from a specific storage called the, just make sure I get the entire path for you, com.apple.mobile Safari plist. It is very common in mobile devices for it to look like a reverse domain name. Like you normally would go to a site like CNN.com. Typically, those names are like the opposite. So com.apple is going to be representative of a native Apple application. So this particular plist was related to that. A plist is, or called a property list, is a data structure that's unique to Apple devices. And there is data pertaining to Google search, not just Google searches, search history that's stored there. There's also, I found evidence of the search terms in Knowledge CDB. The Knowledge C database is an Apple database that is meant to store information about users so it can determine future functionality, what you're looking for, et cetera. So that's the Knowledge CDB. It's more of a system level artifact. And then there was also, and these were the observed search terms, and most of the tools picked up both of those search terms in there. Not all tools did pick up the one that was from the wall, which was the instance of Haslong to die in cold. That's how I'm pronouncing the HOS. If you would like me to clarify it a different way, that's fine. That particular search term was recovered from a SQLite database, the one I later explored, and Celebrite specifically demonstrated and showed that particular search term as a suspended state tab, and that's a really intricate artifact whenever we're ready to explore that. That is the one that was marked as recovered. So those were my initial findings, just looking at what the automated tools parsed. However, Celebrite was the tool that found that particular search term.
Cool. Now, you used a term in there as far as a wall or a write-ahead log file. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you please explain to the jury what your understanding of that term is based on your training experience?
Absolutely. This is a really interesting data structure, the way it works. So the way SQLite databases work is the data, before being committed to the database, which is almost like an Excel spreadsheet if you think about that. Each table is like a page on an Excel spreadsheet. The data before going there goes kind of to almost like a text file, like if you were to have a doc, of writing all the changes that need to happen to that Excel spreadsheet. And they're not made to that spreadsheet until it closes. So what happens is as you're doing things, either adding a website by searching for it, or closing a tab or deleting a text message in a SQLite database in general, both things you add are written to that text document or things you delete. So they all hang out there together. So it's any changes that are going to be made since you started using that application until it's closed. Then they change there, and then it reopens. So to make an analogy, if you're in a restaurant and you order some food, the food being the data, and you at the table being the table that the data is going to, when you request that data and you say, I'm adding it, it goes to the area where the waiter or waitress or server is going to grab it from, right? That warming station. That is almost like our write-ahead log. And so different tables are ordering food, and food is constantly being put there. If somebody, maybe their steak came out rare and it needs to be cooked more, when they send it back, it'll also go to that warming area. So you can see there that you've got things waiting to go out to the tables and things being sent back to the kitchen. So simultaneously, that storage area contains both the newest stuff waiting to go out and the stuff coming back. And that's really what a wall file winds up containing: your newest Google searches, your newest text messages, et cetera. as well as anything that you've been deleted, that you've said was deleted, because the reference in there is going to be delete this entry. And so then all of those don't happen until the application is closed and reopened. If the application's been closed, when we do the extraction, we actually don't get the WAL file. We only get the WAL file if at the time of extraction that database had not been closed. So that just means that Safari in this instance was still running when the extraction was done. Most of you, when you use your phones, you leave the applications up. So because of that, we have a WAL file, and so that WAL file is going to contain both data that's been requested to be deleted and new data. Now, when I say deleted in this instance, I don't mean like you as a user saying delete this old text message. What I mean when I say deleted in this instance is removed from the database. So when we're talking about something like a Safari tab, deletion from the database can occur because you close the tab. We all open tabs when we use our browsers on our phone, and we all close them. And so closing in that instance would be a deletion in the database, but what that's doing is not a user requesting deletion. So I just want to be clear on that term.
And to that point, as far as, so when you say something has been deleted, specifically with reference to the write-ahead log or the WAL file, that's not something that's necessarily initiated by the user themselves, correct?
Correct, and I think that's a common misconception, yes.
Your Honor, just in regard to a side issue, may we approach just briefly?
Sure.
Now, Ms. Hyde, you had used the term earlier in your testimony regarding something within your field called an artifact. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term to mean?
An artifact is any trace that's left behind by any action on a digital piece of data.
And can you give the jury an example of sort of what an artifact might be or what an artifact might look like?
Absolutely. So an artifact of you sending a text message would be that we would find the database where text messages are stored, and inside that database we would see the time and date that you sent it, who it received and who it was sent to. It might not be their name, it might be a numerical representation that we have to tie to another database. Then we would have the message itself. It may be in plain text or it may be encrypted or encoded. And then we may have something called a blob, and that would be a reference to data that's too large to store in the database, so it would be elsewhere. So that would be if your text message included, let's say, a picture or a video.
Now, in regard to your analysis and your ultimate conclusions, in this case, you wrote a report, is that correct?
That is correct.
And within that report, there are a couple of tables and a specific figure, is that correct?
That is correct.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could, I'd like to publish to the jury Table 1 from Ms. Hyde's report.
Okay.
Ms. Hyde, do you have a copy of your report with you as well?
I do.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, just because I fear it may be a little difficult to see from where she's seated, if she could refer to the table in her report.
Thank you.
Ms. Hyde, what's up on the screen, and I'm sorry, there should be a laser pointer on the desk before you. Do you see that?
I do. Oh, yes.
So using that laser pointer, if you could draw the jury's attention, or direct the jury's attention, I should say, with respect to what are we looking at in a specific case?
Absolutely. So this table here has a couple of different elements that I'm showing in terms of what searches were searched where, and when, and what source of data they came from. So if we look at this first search, I have them in the timestamp order that is associated with the artifact. I want to clarify that we need to discuss the meanings of these timestamps as we go. So this first one that you're going to see is, and I'm just going to reference my paper because of the size, is 0227 and 40 a.m. So that's 2 o'clock in the morning, 27 minutes and 40 seconds. And it is a search for the term HOF, long to die in cold. And that a timestamp in this instance is from the browser state DB, which is right here. The browser state DB is an artifact that speaks to when tabs are moved. So when you're using your browser and you open different tabs, you may have a search that this time pertains to the time that that tab moved. It could be lots of things. It could be you switch tabs. It could be you close the tab. It could be you minimize the application. Depending on the version of iOS, what can be that browser state of the tab that changes this timestamp differs. But what's very special to know about this timestamp is that that is not the time necessarily of this search. If a browser is opened and a single search is made, those will match. However, as long as that browser hasn't been closed, moved to the background, et cetera. If that browser has had any activity that happens to that tab in terms of application closing, minimizing, this can update. That is what that timestamp is for. This search term is always going to be the most recent search term in that tab. That means the last item that was opened in that tab was HOF long TI die and cold. We cannot tell by this particular artifact what time that search occurred. It is a high likelihood that that tab was opened at this time because there was another search that occurred at 2:27 in the morning. It was a sports site. I cannot pronounce it. It began with an H. Hakmok. Okay, thank you very much for the pronunciation. Hakmok Sports. There were a couple of searches pertaining to that done immediately after, but it appears that that's when this tab was opened and the first search done there. So this search we know was done by this, and we know that it was the last search in the tab because it comes from this source, the browser state DB. And that means that particular timestamp and search pertains to what has happened with the tab. And that's what allows you to open your Safari browser on your iPhone and then open it on your iPad or your Mac and have the same tab. That's the function there. This search here, this is really interesting. So at 6:22:49 a.m., we have an entry in Cache DB that is specifically, if we dig into this URL, this is an Apple suggested term. So when you use a browser and you start to type a search you've never typed before, the browser tries to help you and say, are you searching for this? So as the user began to type the phrase in the immediate search after, which is how long TI to die in CKLD, this particular suggestion came up, indicating, in all likeliness, that the search term being typed had not previously been searched, because Apple suggested, instead of a previous search, it suggested how long does it take to digest food. After how long to digest food had been suggested, the user then has a search at that time, 6:23:51, for how long TI die in cold, and that is coming from the mobile Safari plist, the com.apple.mobile Safari plist I mentioned earlier, and the search is also shown in the knowledge CDB. That's commonly what we would expect. We would expect that search to be in both of those, both that plist and that database. Then the...
Can I stop you?
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as the expectation of that being in both of those, the plist and the other database, why is that?
That is because the search is not being tracked not only by the plist for Safari, but also by the system itself to be able to do that predictive coding. So in the future, when you start to type how long, it gives you what you searched last time.
And with respect to that, how long it takes to digest food, based on your analysis, was that a search term that was ever entered into this phone?
Correct. The source of that, if you look at this first line where it says cdn2smoot.apple.com, that's what indicates that this is an Apple suggested term, not a user input term.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. If you could please continue with the next.
Absolutely. The next search that was done immediately after the search at 623, the next search was how long TI die in CLKD. Again, we see that search both in the Knowledge CDB and the mobile Safari plist. And then we have, so we see it in both databases. Then, so that's how long to die in cold. Sorry, I was on the next line. Then at 624, we get the next search, which is HOS long to die in cold. And we have that search again, both in the Knowledge CDB and the plist. If I were timelining this based on activity as opposed to timestamps associated, what I see here is the beginning of a user typing a search, Apple making a suggestion of how long to digest food. The user does not take that suggestion and rather inputs how long TI die in CKLD. They then make a second search of HOS long to die in cold. That search winds up being the last search in the tab, and that is why we see it in the this particular browser state DB. It should be noted that this is in one of those WAW files and not the raw file.
And so as far as sort of towards the top there, and I know we'll get a little more to this in a moment, but as far as that reading is 2:27:40 in the morning as far as the timestamp associated with the search. Why would that timestamp be associated with it if it's searched later on in the morning?
Because that table isn't showing the time of that search. It's showing the state of the database. So it's saying that the last time that tab was touched, moved to the background or foreground, was 2:27 a.m. The website, as you search more websites in the tab, that gets updated. So the current state that this is showing is that it was, the tab was moved to the background or opened or some action for the tab at 2:27 a.m. when the Hawkmock Sports, I got it right, Hawkmock Sports website was visited. And then once the Hawkmock Sports website was visited, that tab was in continual use. There are other searches and activity that happens. We don't see, that happens eventually. This search gets made at 6:23 a.m., this search at 6:24 a.m. That winds up being the last search in the tab. And because it's the last search in the tab, that's what the final update is and the final status.
So when you say last search in the tab in reference to time, in reference to what time specifically?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
That question, let me rephrase. So as far as the 2:27 tab is closed and then another search done at 6:23, is that correct?
2:27 isn't necessarily when the tab was closed. That's in my report. I say that it's undetermined because there's a lot of things that can cause that timestamp to be there, including tab being moved, tab being minimized. I don't know exactly what caused the tab to get that particular entry, but it is not, that timestamp is not indicative of the time of the search or any URL that's visited there. That time is indicative of movement of the tab, and the search is the most recent search. So they update at different times.
So I guess my question is, as far as from what your analysis is here, is there any use of that tab between, or is there any evidence or artifact of use of that tab between the 2:27 timestamp and the 6:23 timestamp?
So the fact that that timestamp exists at 2:27, combined with the fact that the only existence of this search is at 6:24, means that yes, that time, that particular tab was used after 2:27 when the Hawkmock Sports was searched. I apologize for not being familiar with that name.
Oh, that's absolutely fine. Now, if I could ask you at this point, as you had talked about One in particular database having sort of an intricate artifact. If you could remind the jury of what that is, and if you could explain that at this time.
So the artifact that needed a little bit more explanation and digging was this browser state tab, and that's because if you look at the end of this file name, you'll see it's a db-wall. That means it wasn't in the regular database, it was in the write-ahead log. And to Celebrate's credit, that tool actually parsed the write-ahead log and displayed it where the other tools did not. If you remember before, we talked about write-ahead logs, and we talked about the fact that they can contain data that is both removed from a database and data that's not yet to be committed. And this database, we do not know which that is, but what I did was I manually went through, and that's in the figure, I manually went through and reconstructed the wall files using the Sanderson SQLite tool. And in reconstructing the wall files, I found many. I'll tell you exactly how many if I can refer to my notes. Can I refer to my notes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Approximately 16 instances of that existing in the wall file. Now, what's interesting in that figure is that each entry of something in a write-ahead log gets a unique identifier. So it gets a number, right, that makes it unique. Just like each one of us has a phone number that's unique to us, each entry in the database that starts in the write-ahead log gets its own unique identifier. And that unique identifier in this instance in all 16 entries in the wall file is the same, which shows that it's truly only one search, not multiple searches for that search term in terms of what exists in the wall file. So that's the first piece of nuance there, that it only truly was searched one. And you would have to really dig into that wall file to expose that, but I think it was pertinent to know how many times this was searched.
I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Stop you there for one moment. And Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask Ms. Gilman to publish Table 2 now.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. May I look at Table 2? Sure. Thank you, Your Honor.
And Ms. Hyde, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
I do. That is Table 2 of my report on page 4.
And if you could, again, using the latest form that you have before you, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, is significant to depicted in Table 2 up on the screen.
So Table 2 here is designed to share with us what each of the locations that can potentially have Safari data, what kind of data they hold. And one of the things that many of us are interested in sometimes is, do these things hold our private searches, like if we're in incognito mode in Google or private searching here. So this table denotes if we're seeing private or non-private searches, if it includes tabs that are open or closed, so that we know which artifacts are giving us what kind of information, as well as what some of the associated timestamps mean. So this was designed as a guide to really understand Table 1 more in depth. So this first one here, this refers to the history DB wall file. And that file has non-private searches, it includes closed tabs, and the visit time there is the time that a user reopened the tab. We don't always have the artifacts we want, and in this instance, we did not have that particular one. Then we have the Safari Tabs DB. This has private tabs and non-private tabs. And it shows only tabs that have not been closed. So this is an active tabs database. The next one we have is the browser state DB and its wall file. And this is the one we were referencing where that we keep talking about where that 2:27 a.m. number is coming from. So this one is going to be non-private searches. It includes closed tabs, which is important, and the last viewed time. So when an item went to the background. So it's about the tab, not about the search. That's probably the most important demarcation. And one of the issues here is when the tools parse the data, they call the columns what the columns are called raw in the data. Those don't necessarily tell us what they mean. We have to verify and validate what they actually mean. So when I'm saying last underscore view time, that's what the database name is, not necessarily the actual function, or not what we would presume it to mean. The next one, the last one here, is the mobile Safari plist, and this one actually tells us, the date here gives us the time that something was queried reliably.
Now, if I could ask you, if you could just explain to the jury as far as these SQ or SQLite databases, how exactly do they work, and what, if any, relation do they have with regard to data and information with the write-ahead log or the wall file?
So SQLite databases work and function as a storage for anything that the phone may need to reference later or that you're doing. They're stored for a variety of things. Most of your third-party apps use SQLite databases, and multiple applications do. So SQLite gets information in, and it allows for that information to be updated, added to, or removed from. So data that's in that situation, that it's sitting in the database, that is what we refer to as live data. Then data that is waiting to be put into the database, that is sitting in the wall, or it has been requested to be removed, that is what's in the write-ahead log, and we call that non-live data because it's not in the active database. So when you're using an application, and it's putting that data to that temporary storage area, that wall, that write-ahead log, what happens is then when you request data by going into your contacts, let's say, and looking at the people who are stored in your contacts, right? Your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, all those people. When you're looking, your best friend, you're looking up their numbers, that data is all stored in that database. So when you add someone, it does that entry to the wall. Now, so if I just added Sally, how do I know that Sally's in there, right? Well, what happens is the interpretation of the SQLite database goes to the wall, checks and sees if it's in the wall, and uses the wall to incorporate it together to present you everything as if it's in there. Then when you close the application, you close contacts. You don't just put it away like go switch apps. You actually close it. When it closes, all of those changes get committed. So now the items that you've requested to be deleted, that contact you don't like anymore, that X, whatever, their data is no longer in there. The data that you've added is now in there, and now that's all live. Sometimes we can get more complex and recover some of those items that are left over because they are marked for deletion but still sit in the database, or they're sitting on a page that is no longer active in the database. So there's a lot of places that we can recover data from in addition to the wall that exists in the database after something has happened, but that isn't pertinent to this particular use case.
Now, as far as that sort of interplay between the SQLite database and the wall, what, if any, sort of, as a forensic examiner, what, if any, sort of complexities arise out of it?
Oh, one of the biggest complexities is the assumption that because data exists in the write-ahead log, that a user took an action to delete it. When I teach at the university, when I peer review my colleagues' reports, this is one of the most common mistakes I see. And it's really because some of the forensics tools to indicate that the file has been recovered, they put a big X on it. And that was actually a big subject of that standardization of file recovery paper I referenced earlier. And it speaks about all kinds of files, but actually has a special section on SQLite, specifically because that nuance is often missed by examiners.
Now, in reference to that being marked as deleted or misinterpreted as deleted by user, is there a specific tool of the tools that you mentioned before, as far as Celebrite versus Axam versus that has that information that others may not?
So Celebrite and Magnet Axiom, both Celebrite Physical Analyzer and Magnet Axiom, both have file system viewers that then have SQLite database viewers. I would say that those SQLite database viewers have more of a basic function in terms of looking at data in the live database. They don't allow for deep analysis of the write-ahead logs, which is why in my analysis I use the specialized Sanderson forensic browser for SQLite.
And so when you see something like that in a Celebrite extraction, is there, what if any further analysis do you do to sort of look behind it?
Absolutely. Anytime I see an entry marked as recovered, and I'll use the term recovered instead of deleted, by Celebrite, and the source is a write-ahead log, I would go and begin reconstruction of the write-ahead logs using Sanderson's forensics tool to get to the meat of, is this something that it has been deleted, or is this something that has yet to be written to the database? You can often see remnants of that based on how many unique entries there are of it. What the other thing we do is, so I mentioned that when we have the WAL file, it hasn't been applied. So if I take the SQLite database and the WAL file out, and I make another copy of them. So I've got one copy I'm looking at Sanderson, and I take another copy and I actually open it. What's cool is it does the commits. So then I have a copy of the database that actually has all those changes. So I now know if the entry was deleted by just comparing the two. So I can do that analysis by basically making the database think it was reopened, by reopening it with a non-forensics tool in that instance, just to see what it would look like in real life. And then I can look at the difference between the two and determine if something was marked for deletion or addition.
Now, are there different reasons from your training, your experience, and your knowledge of these systems? Is there different reasons for why it's your conclusion that that particular search or those search terms were not deleted by the user specifically?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of reasons. First, the way tabs work from a functional perspective, you can close the tab, but there's not really a user deletion function for the tab. And there was no evidence of other deletion, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense that the term was, I don't see evidence that the term was searched prior to that 624 time. So since the term wasn't searched prior to that 0624 time, the existence of the tab being closed would not mean that that search was deleted, because then it would be evident in the other databases pertaining to the actual search, not the databases pertaining to the state of the tab. Is there a possibility that the tab was closed? Absolutely, but that is not a deletion. Secondly, an existence in the WAL file, as we mentioned, could be that it's something new, not something that was deleted. So just its mere existence in the WAL file doesn't mean it's deleted. I should say that that same X in the tools, you have to check the file, because it could be from a free list or a free page, in which case, I know we didn't go into those details, nuance of SQLite databases that actually doesn't pertain to this. However, those would be truly deleted items. So there's other places where we would expect potential recovery, not necessary in this instance. And you can have something that's in a WAL file and deleted without being in those other locations. Just stating that its existence in the WAL file itself doesn't mean deletion. But there are other SQLite things that would clearly indicate deletion that aren't applicable to this particular search.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask Ms. Gilman to publish Figure 1 from Ms. Hyde's report.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And again, Ms. Hyde, you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, this is Figure 1. This is a direct screen capture from Sanderson's tool from the browser StateDB, limited to the Haas long to die in cold search.
If you could, using that laser pointer, again, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, is significant or of note that you observed in using the Sanderson tool that's depicted in Figure 1.
Absolutely. So all of these searches are the exact same term. And here we have the order index. And here we have that last view time. And by looking at the last view time, which is the raw title of that artifact for the timestamp we were looking at, these are identical. This, and more importantly, are even the actual UUID for these are identical, which is right here. Now, the offsets are different, and what that means is that this is just appearing several times in the write-ahead log. It has moved, as the database has moved data through the write-ahead log to different positions. but has in every instance the same unique identifier, meaning that all of these entries are the same entry, just shown multiple times in the same database.
And to that point, as far as the multiple times that it's listed within there, what, if any, relationship does that have to how many times it was actually searched by a user?
Well, that UID shows that in this particular instance that it existed once in the last time in the tab, because this artifact, it does not tell us how many times something was searched by the user. This artifact is limited just to the tab. We would look at the mobile Safari plist, which has one entry for this timestamp, or knowledge CDB, which also only has one entry for this search. Those two locations are where we would determine how many times it had been searched, as opposed to this location, which could tell us that if there were multiple entries, but there is only one. But since this is limited to just the last search that's showing in a tab, it isn't a good source to say how many times was it searched, just not this particular artifact.
But from other artifacts, you were able to determine that?
Absolutely. You can determine that from both mobile Safari plist and knowledge CDB.
And I'm sorry, I jumped in there just as far as turn your attention back to figure one. What, if anything else, significance do you know in that?
That's really what's of significance, is that it is the same entry there multiple times, and we can tell by the unique identifier that it is the exact same entry also. And it's, although it's the same search term and the same timestamp, it's only one instance of it, just it's stored in the database multiple times at multiple offsets.
Now, from the timestamp associated with that depicted in this figure, what, if anything, can you say as to or what, if anything, were you able to conclude from your analysis as to the time that the website was viewed?
Well, I guess I should really clearly, for people who may not be familiar, that doesn't look like a normal time, right? That's because this is an Apple WebKit timestamp, so we actually convert it to a regular time. But when you look at this number raw, you can actually see that it's consistent throughout, even though you don't know what it is. But if we put it into a decoder, this particular timestamp is where we're getting January 29th, 2022 at 02:47 a.m. And to be clear, just for real clarity, when we actually translate this timestamp, it's in universal time constant, not in local time, but for the sake of conversationalists, I'm using the local time here as opposed to the time in the universal time constant, which is how this artifact is particularly stored.
Now, with your analysis, is there some kind of testing that you conduct, or can you explain to the jury sort of what that is and how it relates to your analysis here?
Absolutely. So with this artifact and being able to determine what this timestamp really means, I actually did quite a bit of testing, which is fun, but that's okay. So we went ahead and took a jailbroken iPhone, and the purpose of a phone being jailbroken is we're bypassing the security protocol so we can monitor the data and its storage in real time and bring the data through. We did this manually in terms of pulling the data out, and we also did multiple forensic images at different stages. We manipulated tabs, we did some Google searches, and then we would close tabs, move tabs, and perform several different searches that we scripted out first, what we were testing, and then checked to see how that timestamp was moving. We even did some really interesting things where we tried.
Sorry, objection.
Yes. Okay.
Ms. Hyde, I'm sorry. So you had, I think when you were talking about some of the testing that you had conducted, you used the term we. There are other individuals that worked on this particular assignment?
I had somebody peer review and test my testing. So they didn't work on the case, but as I was testing, one of my team members just validated that I was following my test plan. That's just normal practice that we use peer review.
So the testing that you were testifying about is testing that you...
I conducted, correct. But I had peer review by my team member on the script I had made to do my testing. So, and I use when I do testing, I'm following the NIST guidelines for data set generation and testing that's outlined by OSAC, which ironically, I should disclose I'm a co-author on.
And then, if you could, I'm sorry, Ms. Hyde, just continue as far as your test.
Absolutely.
Your test.
Yeah, so then populated the device and looked at all of the different data that came back from the different states while it was jailbroken. And the changes that happened, what I was saying was interesting is then tied it to a Mac and saw how the browser state changed if we changed the browser and the tab on a Mac and how that would affect it. And because we could see the differences, and by we, I mean that I had my testing peer reviewed, because I could see the differences of what the data looked like when I was altering it both in the Mac and on the phone, I was getting differences in those timestamps and those different conditions. So in other words, I could get a timestamp that showed in the browser state DB that was earlier than the current search by a variety of means, including manipulating the tabs, closing them, opening them, switching which one was in proper view forward, as well as looking at that tab on an external device, including a Mac and an iPad on the same account.
Now, throughout the course of your work, I think you alluded to it earlier in your testimony as far as your experience is concerned. You've had occasion to work both as a forensic, forensic extractions, forensic investigator.
Yes.
As well as working also in research and development, is that correct?
Correct.
And so from the R&D side, what, if any, role does that play as far as your analysis in general terms and your analysis here when it came to some of the devices or some of the things, the tools that you were implementing?
I believe that my experience in research, development, and reverse engineering throughout my career pertaining to artifacts, of course, influences and my analysis processes in terms of wanting to ensure I understand how things work. I think it actually gives me a better understanding in many ways of how data moves through devices, as well as how understanding why the tools parse and represent data the way they do, in terms of the fact that they are presenting the data as they parse it using the proper algorithms to dissect that data and determine what it is based on testing and knowledge. So I think it actually influences in a positive way the depth that I go through in my analysis.
You had mentioned earlier in your testimony that you had reviewed both Trooper Garino's report as well as an affidavit from Mr. Green. Is that correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the affidavit from Mr. Green, what, if any, issues, of course, of significance did you observe in his analysis?
In Mr. Green's analysis, there is a conclusion that is drawn that a search occurred at 02:47 a.m. on January 29th. Based on the artifact recovered from browser state DB that Celebrite parses. And there are two errors with that. The assumption that that is the time of the search is a misunderstanding of the browser state DB artifact, because that artifact is not the time of search, it's the time of movement of the tab, as well as the statement that, that it was deleted due to the demarcation of Celebrite as recovered.
And based on the totality of your analysis, your testing, and everything that you looked at in this case, what, if any, conclusions did you come to?
My conclusion is that there was a search at 02:47 a.m. for Hawk Mock Sports, and that browser was in use, and there were continual searches due through the night. The phone was, I do agree with Mr. Green's findings that the phone was in use at that time at 02:27. Later, the phone a web search is done at 6:23 a.m. For how long, at that moment, Apple produces a suggestion for how long to digest food. The search is instead completed with how long TI, die, and CKLD at 6:23. A new search is conducted at 6:24 of HOS, long to die in cold, HOS, long to die in cold. That search is then the last search that is made in that particular tab. And that's my conclusion.
What, if any, conclusion did you come to in regard to items being deleted pertaining to those artifacts you were looking for?
In regards to those artifacts pertaining to those search terms, I had no evidence of deletion.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach? All rise for the court, please.
Yes.
And then an hour after that, an hour and 10 minutes after this murder have taken place if all of these things begin at 7:35 in the morning and she's still limp at 9:40?
Probably, I mean, what you're getting at is what rigor mortis or postmortem changes. And so we have to think, you know, that usually starts 2 hours or so after death. So I'm thinking he killed her and then put her in the car, making it look like she's sleeping, trying to fool everybody, right? And then has this whole incident with the tire iron.
Well, let me ask you this. Would the body be limp like that if she's murdered the night before, 6.5 hours beforehand?
I think that's less likely. You know, I think it was more towards the morning because your rigor mortis in general forms 8 to 12 hours and is really peaked 12 to 24 hours. So we would be hitting that real stiff period, barring any other exposure or, you know, chemicals, whatever, if it's going more textbook, if you will. And so I think, you know, this young, healthy girl was probably killed closer to the morning. I'm not saying she wasn't hurt or harmed in any way prior to that, but absolutely killed was probably closer to the morning.
Okay, Gray Hughes, 8:19. Why is he going back at 8:19 and then leaving at 8:31? Because to even get into the complex at 8:19, he's got to speak with the security guard, and she's got to be right next to him.
Yeah, I mean, she's seen on camera 3 times, 7:50, 8:19, 8:31, and actually a 4th time at 9:40, right? And so at 8:19, he comes back, but what is he doing between 8:19 and 8:31 when it leaves again? She would still have to be propped up in the car, but did he cover her with a blanket because somebody might have walked by? And then what was interesting about what that in that press conference that officer said was that we believe that she was moved in the early morning hours. That doesn't seem to be actually quite accurate unless you're just talking about her being moved around for display purposes. She was moved around almost like, you know, I hate to say it, but like Weekend at Bernie's, where he's just driving around. She wants to be seen. I mean, he wants her to be seen in the car because we know that her body was eventually moved. He had already gone back to the apartment, waited for a while, and then at like 12:45, he took off with her body to place her where she was eventually found.
Dr. Laura Petler, this almost strikes me as some form of staging, like staging an alibi and a story of what he's doing that morning.
Yes, we here call that linguistic staging, Vinny. And basically it's what we've talked about before in other cases. It's the fiber of truth and the thread of every lie. And all of these behaviors meet his needs. And again, he is in control. He's in power here. So he is staging both visually and linguistically so that he can, of course, avoid apprehension and get away with what he's doing. But it is his plan. And sometimes they have a plan, but sometimes they don't. And it sounds to me like, he's one of those offenders that gets into what we call cognitive overload once you murder someone, and they forget certain details. And like the issue of the rigor mortis and the time of death, I was thinking the very same thing. You know, the body is limp and then the body is slumped over and all of these things. Yeah, it's absolutely an element of staging. It meets the definition of staging, which is to misdirect a death investigation before the police arrive, or to just cause some kind of white noise, and that's what he's doing.
Ken Jackson, this Holiday Inn Club Vacations property, I don't know if you've been by there yet. Do we know anything about this? Is there any sort of connection, or does it look like it may have just been a place he thought he could go and transfer the body to the trunk without people seeing him?
Right. Well, the report says that he went to the top level of the parking garage. But see, this would have been on a Monday. it's not a real busy day for resorts, especially in February. It's before spring break starts. So this area, it's not real. It's almost like a low season for the tourism industry here. So he may have thought that it would be a place that had fewer people. They, like I said, he went to the top of the garage. If the male moved the body there, so he was not within